This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with us is your other host Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Scree!
What are we talking about today, Puka?
We're exploring those flesh bags that produce imagination, known as mortals. An anthropological study.
Yes, and also the mortal parts of changelings, because that's the whole
Yes.
thing about being a changeling is you have two sides.
You too are a meat bag.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind soul put the entirety of The Fifth Element on YouTube recently, and that one scene where they're like, "Sir, you a registered human?" And Bruce Willis says, "Negative, I am a meat popsicle." It's just classic.
I haven't seen that movie in forever.
Oh, it's so good. That's one we should have talked about in the sci-fi episode.
We should do a whole episode on it. By the time we get to season 8 or something, maybe we can start doing
Winter Regnum 2026.
Yeah.
A watch through. Anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, the mortal side of and the mortal side of games and of changelings and of this is something that until actually kind of the online chatter of C20, I thought like everybody had in their games. Like this was just normal to me. Like in every game I've run and played, there's definitely mortal aspects of things in the lives, and it's like a big part, and like the degree that it is, but like it's always a significant part of every at least chronicle I've been in. You know, one shots may or may not have a huge part, but it's even a little touch of it there. And then I'm like hearing more like all this stuff from people playing online, and they're like, "Yeah, we never really do any of that." I'm like, "What?"
It's how can you not?
It's like people saying, "Oh yeah, vampire. Oh yeah, we don't really deal with blood or feeding or any of the mortal life aspects of that."
Honestly, like I played in a vampire game. Well, I've played in lots of vampire games where this kind of thing happened, where it was just like, "Oh, I need some blood. Okay, roll some dice. Okay, you get 4 points of blood." And I empathize with storytellers who feel the need to streamline that, but that like cuts.
It feels like that doesn't. But the way I don't know if it is. I haven't played in their chronicles. Maybe I'm hearing it secondhand or third hand or whatever. But I feel like they're not even doing that with dreamers and some things. Like you're not even doing abstract roles for banality and glamour and musing in your downtime. Like,
well, and this points back to my frequent complaint that C20 is much more glamour soaked, sometimes to the disadvantage of the game's themes, and that you really can get by with just dross and balefires and whatnot,
although
even though you're not supposed to.
When you look at even the rules is it's a bit confusingly written, so I get glossing over it, or maybe but that would still cause issues even with the printed rules. But
yeah,
you can rely way more on that than you could beforehand. But I think they're still even making it, either intentionally or not, sort of house ruling it even more. Like you can go down that route, like ignore the mortal life.
Part of it also is, I think it ties into the question of what is the purpose of the game, because like there's escapism and there's realism, right? And if we put those on like a spectrum, I'd say Changeling can fit along most places of that spectrum, probably better than most World of Darkness games, with the possible exception of Mage. And I know we've talked about finding parallels with things in our own lives within the setting, but honestly, I kind of feel like we might be exceptions that prove the rule, or in the minority in that case.
I wonder what brings someone. Again, we're not talking about like a player wanting this or the very occasional group. Like, if you want to have no connection to the real world, mortal world, whatever, there's other games that actually focus on that.
Yeah. I don't know if there's like a study that's been done online somewhere of people coming from Dungeons and Dragons versus other places to Changeling and like what impact that has on their play style. But if not, there should be such a thing.
Although I haven't played a ton of D&D, but even that's had more quote unquote regular slice of life things.
Well, D&D weirdly has gotten more and more invested in that over time.
Yeah.
And World of Darkness maybe less and less. I don't know.
Like yeah, sure. When I was 14, no knock on our 14-year-old listeners. We're playing Rifts and occasional D&D and stuff. Yeah, it wasn't really touching on that stuff, but like my whole adult life, at least, it's been.
to return to the topic of bleed that we discussed in the romance episode, this feels like a good opportunity for good bleed, drawing
Yeah,
things out of the game that you can positively apply to your own life with
yeah,
acceptable boundaries. And having an attention to mortals within the setting facilitates that, I
yeah.
think.
Like to me, one of the things I really like about role playing games, tabletop or LARP, though the way that is expressed is a little bit different between the two. One of the things I really like about it is exploring possibilities that actually do affect my life. Like,
Hmm.
what if scenarios, hypotheticals about my own life or about people I know or things I've encountered in real life, and then going, well, what if it was like this, right? I could go to a science fiction episode too for that.
Yeah.
But
It's sort of a safe space for it, or it can be,
yeah,
metaphorically or otherwise.
yeah, which isn't the same as using it for therapy, but I mean,
No.
but it can be used for your life and improving yourself and just
Introspection.
yeah, it's it could be the mental equivalent of exercise to seeing a doctor versus like this could be like the mental equivalent of exercise versus therapy or something. If that makes sense, but
Today I had to sit through a company mandated wellness session on the subject of
mm,
mindfulness, and we talked about all these strategies for cultivating mindfulness, and I just felt
uh,
like I don't need this. I have role playing games.
yeah, I mean that's
Anyway,
I still don't understand what mindfulness is. It sounds terrible, but
I don't think anyone on that call did either, the facilitator included.
any of these workplace mandated things I've had, they don't seem to understand the thing that
Yeah.
when I do know about them, they don't. So,
So anyway, changelings.
yeah, yeah, changelings when they sit through their mindfulness.
Oh, banality trigger. So
Yeah.
when it comes to the mortal side of changelings, do you go through when you're creating a character, do you really like develop the backstory for things like where they go to school, what's their day job, all of that?
Yeah. Like I don't do huge amount I do way less backstory than most people from like my player characters and whatnot. But I do figure out what they're doing now. Like
Mm.
how, you have that resources dots. What is that? How's that represented? Like, what does that actually mean? Who's in their life? Do they have a job? If they don't have a job, how do they deal with not having a job? A big thing that comes up when you're talking even about the freeholds, like every chronicle I've been involved, like longer term chronicle I've been involved in, the fact that freeholds have a mortal side, as in a sense,
Hmm.
is relevant. Like, okay, you have a freehold, great. There's still zoning laws. You could still worry about demolition. You could worry about it. No, that generally comes
No,
like one.
yeah, that was a subplot in one of my games.
Yeah, one of the games I ran, there was like one freehold that the PCs were sort of centered around, which was a makerspace, and I based it on real life. It was a real life makerspace in Ottawa, and then the makerspace was losing their like the landlord was cutting it, and like the plot line was dealing with okay, this big company's selling off, basically get rid of your makerspace. That's your freehold. Like, how do you deal with this? And
Yeah. I sometimes wonder if, because those are very real life situations, I mean,
mhm.
makerspaces aside, what if your rent gets hiked 50%, like
Yeah,
happened to mine in the past? And Changeling, as an escapist fantasy in a literal way, it allows you to kind of solve those problems
yeah.
by sidestepping them in a way. And
But the escapism is that you can solve those problems with unique methods that you can't do in your real life.
exactly,
Not that
yeah,
those problems don't exist.
exactly. I'd go so far as to say that in most cases, when it comes to making characters, I'll start with maybe a vague idea of like kith and court, maybe legacies, but I really enjoy visualizing the character and
Mhm,
writing out the mortal backstory and getting all of that in order, and then sorting out dots and
mhm.
attributes and traits and
I
everything.
do it all over the place for me, but yeah.
But I think that when we visualize ourselves living a life that's not our own, which
Mhm,
that's a big part of role playing games after all, for me, I get a more naturalistic feel for it by kind of writing a biography in my head. So I can say, like, oh, I know I want to play a gunslinger and I want firearms for, or whatever, but that doesn't really tell you much about the person. And
mm.
that's always what I want to focus on more.
Yeah, for me, there's a big. I actually on my sheet, the thing I hang on the most is the backgrounds, like what backgrounds I took and that type of
Yeah.
thing. And the abilities also attributes not as much, but abilities also tie into that. I mean, that's not the only thing, and I'm doing lots of other stuff that's not reflected on the sheet. But I do find the backgrounds very important, and I try not to just only take like chimerical companion
Right.
and
Treasure.
treasure. Yeah. I don't know what else would be the.
I wish more people took retinue, because that's a mortal related background that's got all kinds of
Well,
directions you can
I
go.
mean, with C20 enchanted rules, I don't quite know how that's supposed to work, but that's another.
Have you used it before, like ever?
I have, just I don't use C20 enchantment rules, so it makes more
That's
sense.
true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the Dreamer's background comes up a lot.
Dreamers is kind of the obvious one. I do think Mortal Contacts is always a good
Yeah,
option. Historically, especially because I think a lot of characters were kind of late teenage to early 20s. Like a lot of people went peak
yep.
Wilder. But then when you have these connections that don't really make a lot of sense, like, okay, how do you know this city politician or whatever? Like, having to figure out those connections, I think, is a really good exercise for justifying that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, I've definitely like had those, but yeah, I've never. Most games I've been in for Changeling, at least, they try to justify that stuff, not just you wrote
Yeah,
weird stuff.
poorly.
Yeah, no, and I'll. There's also merits and flaws, like
Yeah,
ward is a flaw, can a mortal ward of some sort, or things like
true
that.
love.
Yeah, true love. That'll
I would even be inclined as a storyteller, particularly for backgrounds, more backgrounds than for
mhm.
merits and flaws. But I would even say, like, you know what? Take 3 free dots, and you can only put them to mortal focused
That
connections like that.
has to be actual part of your character and
Yeah,
will be used in game. Yeah. No,
exactly.
that's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Treasures too. I mean, now that fancy dross has become a focus for treasures. Like, remember we talked before about how
Mhm.
things like the original manuscript of a famous work now just becomes like something you turn into a treasure. But I
Yeah.
feel like the material for that could sort of be mortal connections after a fashion.
Mhm.
Like, what if you have to steal something from an artist for the power it has in order to create a treasure out of
Yep.
it? Or, but the treasure system that we have in C20 doesn't do that idea any favors, because then you're just sticking a cantrip in
Mhm.
it. So,
Yeah. I mean, holdings, we said, like I said, with freeholds, like that's a big part of either freehold or glade. Can
yeah,
There's the mortal side of that can
yeah.
definitely be impactful.
But aside from dots on the sheet, do you also conduct like scenes within a story, like during a game, that are grounded in characters' mortal
Oh
lives?
yeah. Like I will generally I don't do the you just roll your dreamers. Like if you want to regain glamour through musing, we're going to do a scene for that. And I'm big more than most player characters, I think, on splitting the party, quote unquote, but that's another. I think we talked
Sorry,
about that.
to clarify, I don't mean necessarily just epiphanies. I mean like
Oh,
the changeling's own mortal life. Like, do you have
oh yeah.
scenes of characters going to work?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like I don't I get a sense of like we talk about it like in session 0 kind of thing, get a sense of what they're doing.
Hmm.
I've definitely had like I mean, the epiphanies thing does play into that, but also like,
Yeah.
oh, you're encountering someone of high banality if you're not a grump, or not a person, even if you are a grump. Like,
Oh, and we'll get to those.
yeah, bringing that up. Like, I definitely do have that type of thing. I won't do like, I want to get a sense, like, everyone at the table has a sense of like, what is your day to day life like? I'm not going to play it if like nothing remarkable happens, like, no anything of interest, like, not even
Yeah,
banality, but
I don't know. I kind of like putting characters into mundane situation. I mean, not ones that are threateningly banal, but just for
no.
the purposes of seeing
Yeah.
how they bring a little bit of their glamour in. Like, I remember running one scene where they were in like a sandwich shop, and just watching how they handled ordering sandwiches was a delight,
Mhm.
you know?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think I've gone that level of. It's always been like this was a thing you would remark on this week was a notable thing usually when I'm doing that.
I like throwing in those
Yeah.
60 to 90 seconds of like really humdrum everyday mortal stuff that you have to navigate, like finding a book at a library or something, or talking your way into a bar.
This is a side tangent. There's a role playing game called Chubo's Marvelous Wish Granting Engine, which is
What?
coming to
Who's that
the
by?
yeah by Jenna Moran, and it's got this genre settings you can do, and one of them is I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically slice of life stuff like that. Like it's all
Perfect.
that's like the whole mode that you're in potentially for multiple sessions. So.
But I love that because it creates that contrast that shows how important and beautiful glamour is.
Mhm.
And unless you show that contrast, you kind of lose the thread a bit of that. And
Yeah.
also, it's a good exercise in thinking about how the character would handle this real life situation without magic, or without rolling dice even. I understand that not everyone's into like actually acting out these scenes or whatever,
Yeah.
but I also don't want players to get in the habit of using glamour to solve all their problems.
Oh no. What I mean is, like, I would have it if there was a sandwich spot shop. It would
Mhm.
probably be like a difficult order,
Oh, I see.
and maybe there could be rules involved, like social rules or something. Like, that's more what I would.
Kaiser rolls.
Yeah. But yeah, that kind of, just, at least when I'm saying remarkable, like, I don't mean like magical. I mean like,
Yeah, noteworthy.
yeah,
That makes sense. Yeah.
as opposed to like, oh, you had a very normal day. Let's role play that for 8 hours. No.
Well, this is maybe a good segue to return to one of my favorite topics, which is mood and theme. Naturally,
Yeah.
I want to talk about this. What would you say are, well, I guess slice of life, like what's the mood that comes to the foreground when you're doing slice of life in Changeling, would you say?
I don't know. I feel like this is a. Well, we're talking specifically slice of life or the mortal side, because that's not this. Or is that
Well,
this?
mortal slice of life, because I would
Yeah.
say most, no, I'm not going to say most. I would say probably a lot of people approach that in Changeling as dread, as though like just walking to the store is banal, and it's not.
Oh no, I don't do that. Like, but I would say I can't say there's one mood or theme, because it's a whole bunch of possible moods and themes depending on the scene, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah, I meant do you, if you had a preference or anything, because I sure do.
no,
But
I do a lot of player driven, so it's like,
Hmm.
it's either player driven for what they want to accomplish something, which doesn't mean necessarily using magic, or it's, they've wrote stuff in their backstory, and I'm bringing up stuff about their character that was either part of the backstory and part of their sheet, maybe, or something's come up. Or one way it could also be like dealing with, okay, your character did some sort of fantastical thing, and now you have some chimerical damage that hasn't healed,
Oh no.
and you're trying to do your job with that, like, and
Yeah,
get through the day when you're like wincing in pain, and you're like, that sort of stuff. So
yeah.
all sorts of things like that. Like, it's usually a complication that you're dealing with, so it's some kind of conflict and drama.
I think we need to do an episode at some point on the difference between running Changeling as character driven versus story driven, because I think
Yeah.
I tend to veer a lot towards story driven.
Yeah, I
But
don't like story driven and role
no,
playing
no.
games.
I
I
mean,
like character
it's
driven.
not that
Yeah,
I don't pay attention to the character side. I do like to
yeah,
incorporate that, but I want to bounce the story off the characters and see what they do, like mice.
yeah. Well, it's not like I'm just saying, "Oh, what are you doing now, kit player?" No, it's not like that either. Like, there is stuff happening. There's a world happening. There's things happening,
Yeah.
right? But I'm more about making it. I don't really focus on it as like a, if we wrote this down in a book, or like that we acted this out on TV, would this make sense as a medium? I don't really do that.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I get quite that
Yeah.
cinematic about it or
Hmm.
anything, but just so like for me, I guess because when I think about what is the purpose of changelings within the mortal world, like within that ecology,
Hmm.
what are they there for? And things that I frequently come back to are wonder, obviously, and
Hmm.
kind of bittersweetness. So, like, on the one hand, they're bright spots within an otherwise dull world. And then on the other hand, the wonder that they bring will almost certainly never be enough, either to stave off their own undoing or to truly effect lasting change within the mortal community. Which, incidentally, I have in my notes here. I think that's a really good story arc because, like, yeah, your characters may be able to slay the chimerical dragon or find the treasure, but can they fundamentally change a completely normal mortal town for the better?
Yeah.
No monsters, no prodigal antagonists or anything, just people living bleak lives. Like, what do you
Yeah.
do with that?
I've never had. That's weirdly, in a way, more epic scale than any of the chronicles I've run. Like, changing a whole town is beyond like what.
Yeah, when we think about like film inspirations, it's like
Yeah.
Chocolat. That is a changeling movie, you know?
Hmm.
Or like Were the World Mine, which I think fewer people have probably seen, but it's campy and wonderful. So
Yeah. So mine's been more on the Amelie's side of impact.
yeah. Oh, that's true. We did have that
Yeah.
in our inspirations. But also, I mean, other more character-driven moods. I think you could do, depending on your players, you could have like pity or even cruelty,
Yeah.
because some Fae are just going to treat mortals like garbage.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's another thing too. Like, dealing with other Fae well, okay, I've also run things where the player characters are treating mortals like garbage, but also like dealing with dreamers. I don't mean like the dreamer's background, but I just mean like low banality humans that give off glamour kind of thing. Like
Mhm.
interacting with them, interacting with. You're talking about the bright spots. I think there's mortals have the bright spots, can have the bright spots too, but they
Yeah,
don't know they do. So there's less of there's more danger. They can't protect themselves as well. They're not as aware.
yeah, and the bright spots, changelings, I would say, stoke other fires with their own or something.
Hmm. Yeah.
But again, glamour can't solve all your problems.
No. But I mean, there's epiphanies and there's like the quests of banality and stuff. But those are all things that anyone can do, basically. Well, not Rhapsody, but most of the stuff are things that anyone can do, right? You can do anyone can do musing. They won't get the glamour out of it, but they can do ravaging.
So yeah, that's actually a good. Have you noticed how, like, the game often talks about epiphanies as something that the Fae do to any mortal, but then the book also pretty clearly states that true capital D dreamers are rather sparse? Something for the demography episode to talk about.
Yeah, what the heck's a dreamer is and it was
Yeah,
muddled, and then C20 just threw a bunch of more muddle onto it,
yeah.
and yeah,
I think you can read that either as the books are muddled and contradicting themselves, or, like you said, changelings amuse and ravage even when there's no glamour gain to be had from it. I mean, that's how I would
yeah.
read it.
But I mean, I know people in my life who regularly engage in musing, and other people who regularly engage in ravaging, and it's just
Yes, absolutely.
yeah. And the only difference is they don't. They might even, in a sense, get a feeling, a rush, a sense of satisfaction, whatever. They just
Yeah,
don't get mechanical benefits because there's no magic powers. But it can still change your mood and change how you
yeah.
feel. Both the person you're doing it, both of them.
Related to that, I mean, how do you? I think we've talked about this before. We've done so many episodes now. How do you usually incorporate epiphanies into your sessions? Like, how frequently? How long do they take?
Uh, did we talk about how I like to do split scenes and stuff?
I think at some point.
Yeah. So what I do try to do is turn the camera every 5 minutes or so when there's
Mm,
not when the party's split, quote unquote, and just to keep things. It doesn't have to be literally contemporaneous. You just don't want events in one influence the other in a confusing way.
mhm.
And I'll do one of those. Like you can be like, "Oh, you need glamour. Okay, how are you getting it?" I mean, if you're talking specifically epiphanies, like that type of thing, and we'll role play through the scenes and whatnot for it, following
Mhm.
the rules for it. And there's been a lot of like, well, I thought when I made my character they would only muse, but
Desperate
this takes
times.
a long time, and I guess I'm gonna burn through my own dreamers, right? Like
Yep.
this has happened because they needed that glamour tonight, and ravaging's just so much faster.
Yep. This is part of why I like to use house rules about having ambient glamour because I don't know. I don't want to force anyone to feel like they have to ravage in order to proceed through
Hmm.
the game. But yeah,
Well, I mean, they don't have to. There's other ways to deal with it.
yeah,
I mean, there's also what's it called? The new one where you can use your kith
revelry,
revelry. Yeah,
but only once per story. Make it
yeah.
count. I'm pretty insistent on those kinds of scenes in game,
Hmm.
like hunt scenes in Vampire are the same.
Yeah.
I'd say maybe my ideal game would be it would kind of have to be an episodic game, but each session would be like, okay, pick a player, someone volunteer, whatever, and just a few minutes of riffing about their interactions with a dreamer, whether it's one that
Hmm.
they, have in their their stable or just someone that they meet and just kind of riff. It could be an actual epiphany or not, depending if they need glamour, but just to kind of give players the practice in figuring out those scenes of mortal interaction.
Yeah. What I've done generally is so I keep trying to do this whole story mechanic because the game's built around it. Like a story is a length of time.
Hmm.
And I keep struggling with it. But like, what I'll do is if we're gonna have like a big time jump, that I'll sort of gloss over, and you can kind of like get a sense of what happened, but not in any detailed role playing out scenes, and recenting glamour, willpower, and banality kind of to whatever like temporary values to whatever
Hmm.
default state. But if we're mid story, which could still have time, some amount of like it could still take weeks or months one story in game. At that point, it's like, okay, you want to gain glamour. you want to burn off your banality, like you want to deal with imbalance. Like none of it is just roles. It's all scenes that happen in a tabletop game. LARP, that'd be unmanageable. But
The other thing is, in regards to banality, I mean, it's one thing to ask somebody each session to kind of narrate through their interactions with the dreamer or just kind of having a glamorous moment with someone. I think having a counterpart to that could also be fun. Like, try to get someone to hit their antithesis once per session. Just to remind players that, like,
oh yeah,
there's the way that glamour and banality looks like, the way that mortals hit them with banality is different for each of them, and the way
oh,
they create
and that's a
glamour.
thing. Like talking about safety tools, if we're doing like lines and veils, I will actually like you can't take your antithesis of something that's on your lines and veils or that's on the list.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
has to be
yeah.
something that would be prevalent
That's an
in the
excellent.
game.
That is an excellent point. I never thought about that loophole
And
before.
that's a lot of people, and it's not a loophole, even like intentional one, but a lot of people, when you're making a character for a lot of people, it's there's a piece of themselves in the character.
Yeah,
And then that could mean that your character has the same antithesis as you in a sense. And if it's your antithesis, there's a good chance it'll be on your. So yeah, you gotta fool around with that. It doesn't mean your character has to like things that are on your line as veils, but like mechanically, that's not your antithesis.
yeah. Something I didn't really think about until getting ideas together for this is that the list of antitheses, as given in the book, or the suggestions, they're all active. Like they're things a changeling has to choose to do, just like the other banality triggers. And while I don't necessarily need to go back to the days of, the librarian shushes you and you get several points of banality, like in the Autumn People book,
Mm-hmm.
I do think having more triggers that just kind of happen to you adds a bit more of a threat to the game.
Yeah.
Because I think as it is now, the only thing that's really out there is like banality 8 or higher mortals, and even grumps don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
So, like, how many of those are there really in the game, whether they're Autumn People or not?
I would say more than there are dreamers.
Maybe, but even then, it's like, are you likely to encounter them and be forced to be around them on a regular
Yeah.
basis?
For me, I would say if you work at a office in person with a reasonable size or are doing a customer service job or something, you'll encounter people banality 8 or higher. And whether or not you're having the interaction, but I mean that definitely could happen. There's definitely locations that are banal too, and that can
But
factor
that
in.
requires the character to engage in those things. Like, how many changeling characters are, well, I work in an office? No,
I mean,
there are some for sure,
yeah,
but
you might go to school. That's a lot of characters I've had, but I've
it's
done,
true.
especially and then there's, I mean, one character I'm thinking of in a game I ran. The player character was an actor. Okay, well, you're going to encounter
Yeah.
situations that, like, if you look at kind of the jobs you can have, especially if there's the whole question of how does online work with a work from home
Mm.
thing. But if you're like in person going somewhere to do your job around other people, which I think is the majority of jobs out there by far, there's the potential for encountering both dreamers and high banality people and sometimes autumn people, which is not the same thing. But
Even then, if you're a grump, you don't even have to worry.
yeah.
I guess what I want is an antithesis, or to have antithesis in general be something that you can stumble across and just have to deal with in the moment.
Mhm.
Because that to me is more what it feels like it should be.
Yeah, and I do think, yeah, antithesis isn't great. Whether or not it's active or passive, like this is one of the ones is wearing a suit and tie on her mortal body, right? Okay. That should only come up if you actually legitimately will sometimes have to wear a suit and tie.
Right, yeah. There
Yeah.
are some kith frailties that are more passive, which, that can work. But
Hmm.
yeah. Actually, to return to theme for a second, or several seconds probably, when mortals themselves are kind of like a constant focus in the game, like if it's not a dreaming game or if it's not a court politics game and there are mortals present very frequently,
Hmm.
I think patience is a really big theme to go along with balance that, we've talked about a
Hmm.
lot. So, like, if you're a changeling looking to inspire others, how much grief and how much banality are you willing to put up with for the sake of just bringing glamour into the world? You know,
Hmm.
I was trying to think of examples of this, and I wrote down in my notes, does the joy of teaching outweigh the bureaucracy you have to put up with? And it's like
Yeah.
that. It's ultimately, if you are inspiring more than you are suffering, that's kind of the
Hmm.
question, right?
Yeah. And I've also had it like, oh, you're going on a quest of the dreaming, not into the dreaming, but like you have to go find this MacGuffin or something, right? Or
Mhm.
you have to go hunt down somebody, or you're trying to deal with. You're going to encounter mortals,
Yeah.
and like if you actually look at the mists and you look at the, even if you are pulling out your cantrips, okay, well if it's a banality 8+ person involved, that's raised the difficulty by 1, even if you are a grump, so it's like base 9. The mists won't cover up impressions of things necessarily. They won't. It's not like, oh, I used my cantrip, therefore everyone doesn't remember that I was there at all. That's not how the mists work. If you read through the
Yeah, yeah.
descriptions, right? You've created this weird, disorienting situation, and people might fill in the gaps with something bad about you, worse than what you did.
And you might be on camera.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah. And if, oh, you glitched out the camera, okay, that's still not good, actually.
yeah.
Like, oh, you've countered a situation where they're calling the police now. Like, this is not a good situation, right? So you have to like de-escalate. You have to, or you've now made the game about that. It's like a playing Grand Theft Auto with the star rating going up. You know, that's kind of your.
Well, unless you want to go in another direction with the theme and go full fight the man, that's a choice.
Yeah, but that can definitely spiral fast too, and still burn through a lot of banality and problems and
Live fast, undo young.
yeah. But I think like in general, like you're a changeling, you can't live in the dreaming all the time, like literally
Exactly.
in the
Yeah.
dreaming. And you have to deal with the autumn world and you have to deal with it. You know, it doesn't mean that everything is just about autumn world and everything's about you working at your sandwich shop and trying to deal with your landlord and no, but like it's not all about that, but that plays into the other more fantastical things in your life,
Hmm.
all interfere with each other and cause complications and drama, and that's where interesting games come out of, I think.
Yeah, it's like if you have one foot solidly in the mortal world, you need to have some practice with mortal methods
Hmm.
and solutions. Even if
Yeah.
magic gets you across the finish line, you need some kind of.
And if you don't have one foot solid in model world, you actually have a lot of problems now dealing with
Yeah,
the more you still have to deal with it. Oh, look, you don't have any form of identification, source of income, or
yeah.
like that kind of thing. That's not a escaping problems with the mortal world. That's just compounding them for your character, which that's great, but like that's gonna come up.
Hmm.
So at least I think it should in the games. So
So one option that changelings have, of course, are Kinain.
hmm.
And putting aside the fact that with C20 you certainly run a whole Kinain game, what function do they serve within a chronicle? Not in the setting, because we get plenty about what they do in the setting, like being the intermediaries between banal
Hmm.
stuff and the Fae, and being allies and being the person watching their relatives become undone. But like in a chronicle, have you had Kinain in your chronicle, and how do those issues?
Very little, actually. I feel like I should have
Yeah,
more, and I think I will more going forward. I think ways you could would be like we talk about love interest and other things. Like there's like someone you can talk to who's not in the whole changeling, the Kithane society, but you can talk to them about it. Like that's
yeah.
important.
From the point of view of running a scene, I think, like, narratively, what I want Kinain to do is to demonstrate a milder version of Fayness that fits more
Hmm.
easily into the mortal world.
Yeah.
Because along those same lines, like, if we treat that Fayness as a metaphor in the game of Changeling,
Hmm.
and Glamour as kind of the internal spark that a role player has out of the game. Maybe Kinain are a better role model, if that's the term, for players themselves when they step away. I don't know about you, but when I'm done this podcast, I'm not planning to go slay any dragons. I
Hmm.
may go to the pharmacy, go to the supermarket, and try to be as joyful as I can be to bring those bits of
Hmm.
glamour into the world. But Kinane, I think that would be how they would be living their lives. And for the changelings, it's like, oh, I
Yep.
don't know.
Yeah, and I do find they seem like they're more able to have a balanced existence. Like
Ironic, isn't
they're
it?
yeah, they're not burning through. They're not like live fast die young kind of changeling aesthetics.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Yeah, they're very solidly in both worlds in a way.
Yeah. And that's, it is frustrating how C20 doesn't give you a lot. I think the Enchanted book gives
Mhm.
you a lot, but
Yeah.
C20 just kind of says, like, this is kind of what they do from a broad Fey society perspective, and it doesn't really tell you much for, like,
Yeah.
okay, if you have this character hanging out, like, yes, they provide an alternate
Mhm.
perspective. What is it?
It feels like sometimes it's like a caricature of werewolf kinfolk. Some of the
Maybe, yeah.
stuff, yeah, as opposed to more useful. Yeah,
Well, and then let's talk about the enchanted while we're
yeah,
at
that I've used a lot.
it. So there's kind of, I think there are two ways that I can see using them in a fashion that really kind of focuses on mortalness as a theme.
Mhm.
One is look at how dangerous it can be to get swept up into this world of glamour and
Mhm.
adventure. Like, definitely very exhilarating, but things probably won't end well for them. So it's kind of a cautionary tale.
Yep.
But then on the other hand, sticking with that assumption of players seeing something fey in themselves, then enchantment is an opportunity for players to like navigate the process of bringing wonderment to people who might need
Mhm.
it. Quite separate from anything to do with epiphany, again. And a responsible storyteller, I think, should pay attention to how players deal with the unglamorous. Not necessarily the fully banal, but just, the neutral stuff. Like, do they move too fast with these mortals? Are they too pushy? Do they ensure the person's well being along the way?
Mhm.
There's a thread of ordinary people just don't understand until you open their eyes in the way enchantment is presented in the game. And
Yep.
depending on how you engage with the real world things that bring you glamour, that will require varying degrees of caution. So if the
Yep.
characters are reckless with enchantment and you're running a serious slice of life game, you want to show the consequences so that the players learn from it.
Yeah, there's different types of mortals. Some of them are practically enchanted as it is in terms of their mindset,
Yeah.
and some of them are not. And enchanting those second group, which is now very hard in C20, but that's why I like using the older rules. Um, I headed a lot of player characters, and me when I'm playing player characters. That's like not the cantrips around mortals getting around problems. It's like let's try enchanting them, see if that can fix this problem.
Oh no.
No, that just doubled down, but that's fun, right? As a, like from a player perspective, I think that's fun, even if
Yeah.
it's
Not so fun for the mortals.
yeah, like you have gotten into a full-on fight and the police called. Enchanting a police officer has consequences and can make things very
Yeah.
difficult. That's happened in games.
To be fair, I do think players generally are sensible enough
Yeah.
to go the option of like calling on the weird rather than full on enchantment, because then it can just be at the end of the scene. The mortal is like, what just happened? And it's not like they're going to have a really weird day or several days.
Yeah, it depends though on what you're trying to
Yeah, for sure.
like. It's like, are you invoking the weird? Or are you doing that because like when you're doing that, you do that. It's not like it's not it affects everyone else around you unless they're also invoking the weird, right? So that could. But if there's a one mortal that's being a problem and you enchant that one mortal, that's now changed them for the whole interaction. So anyway.
Yeah. One other thing about morality, like changelings aren't compelled to have any by the system. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, that's fine, I think.
No, it's fine, but whatever you feel about that,
Yep.
dragging actual humans into a changeling adventure is a good place to just showcase what a character is like in that regard, even if it doesn't have
Yep.
any mechanical impact on the game.
Yeah. Well, I like having the consequences, right?
Yeah,
Like it's like you can choose to make your character have whatever morality you want, but you're also going to face the moral consequences of your action. Not punishment necessarily, but like you were reckless and now someone's very hurt because of you,
yeah,
physically or emotionally or yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily just have to be grounded in morality, I guess, or grounded in the mortal world. Like
Mhm.
this can have political repercussions in the Fey court, or now your character has a reputation, like all those kinds of things. To
Yeah.
paraphrase the old chestnut, you can judge changelings by how they treat the least mortal among them.
I've also found with enchantment specifically, because I've done like crossover mage. This isn't quite mortals, but crossover changeling mage games. When you have an enchanted mage PC, which
Hmm.
you could do this with a mortal PC, but they're more limited, right? I found some players really like having the double life of like there's who you are when you're enchanted and there's who you are when you aren't,
Hmm.
and that can be fun if the right kind of character, like kind of player with the right kind of characters, regularly getting enchanted by the player characters, and then they have to go back to not being enchanted, and then they go to being enchanted again, and they remember everything again.
It's
Yeah.
interesting because that, I mean, having the contrast between being enchanted and unenchanted is like, well, you could also just play a changeling, but
But that's like going through. You're not yo-yoing through the
yeah,
forgetting
yeah, yeah, yeah.
like every other day, right? So
Yeah, so that it adds that particular element to the
yeah.
story. Yeah, I like that. And also, if you're doing like a character like that, especially if you have a guest player who's going to be enchanted or is going to be a Kinain, that really gives an opportunity for someone to be the voice of concern. Not necessarily like a banal stick in the mud, but they will see more clearly maybe what kind of person that this individual who they thought was their friend or family member really is. Because lest we forget, changelings are monsters. So,
Yeah, and it's also great just to have someone where it doesn't have to be with Enchanted, but it works well with Enchanted, is bringing in the other either intense NPC, I want to say, I don't know, major NPC or just temporarily major NPC, or somebody temporarily playing a character who Enchanted, going like, especially someone who's not, if you bring in like, oh, somebody's wanting to join your game for one session and they're playing an Enchanted Mortal, the nonsense that the player characters get up to in like any role-playing game, I love it when they're like, what are you talking about? And they just like highlight how ridiculous and sometimes dangerous, but like the player characters have become. Like, why are you the Duke of what? And you're doing like the...
I mean, they're lucky if it's just ridiculous and dangerous and not horrifying and evil.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Fae are great and everything, but sometimes...
Yeah. But I do also play enchantment as not, I can describe it this way, it's not just the same person completely unaffected, but now they can see enchanted reality. Like, there definitely is a shift of mindset, I think. Somebody is enchanted.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's important there. Like, they're not denying this is happening. They might not like that this is happening, though. But...
Yeah. And then, of course, there are Autumn People.
Yep. I think Autumn People make great foils and long-running antagonists.
I think you said previously at some point that you saw them as the truest antagonists of the game, at least through some lens.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
I think so, yeah. You could maybe change an Autumn person to not be an Autumn person anymore, but you can't... You could have a Thaline temporarily ally, or even a Fomorian, or some sort of like... The worst thing in Changeling, you could in theory come up with a situation where it's like, okay, we've got a bigger problem that we both have, and let's deal with this together. You can't really do that with Autumn People.
Yeah.
They are always the antagonists. Like, they might not be a major antagonist. They might not be, depending on the Autumn person and the situation, a huge problem to deal with, but they're always a problem to deal with.
They're antagonistic.
Yeah. And I also definitely do Autumn People in general. It doesn't have to be like a role, like a kenning role or anything like that. Like, they do not like how player characters act.
No, they do not.
Or low banality people in general. They just don't like that. Like, they might hate the person. They might think, oh, you could do better. Oh, I want to fix you. Oh, I hate you. I want to destroy you. Like, they might have different opinions of somebody who does that.
Yeah.
In that situation. But they're not liking that how the player characters are behaving. And that's important there. Like, high banality in general may be like, but they could be live or let live or something, even a high banality. But like an Autumn person, no. They're not just for somebody with high banality.
Yeah. They actively have the signs on the street.
Yeah. We do get some example of their powers. And I like making new ones for the situation and stuff. So these are like minor in other World of Darkness game troops. Maybe they're Numina. I don't know, but I would give anybody this. And like, these could be even used outside of a Changeling game. Like, you can bring in, I think Autumn People could work great in a mage game, or even like anything where you have to deal with regular people.
Yeah. Oh, I don't have this in my notes at all, but it just occurred to me we didn't talk at all about hedge magic, and that's something we don't get much of in Changeling. But
yeah, I the whole prodigal thing feels like a separate thing from the mortal.
Yeah, that's true.
I mentioned a little bit with the mages, but like, Autumn People can be used, I think, outside of Changeling, even if you're running a different World of Darkness game in theory. But I think for Changeling, they're great.
I honestly don't use them much, but I feel like I should use them more. I almost want players to feel like there's a game that exists which is diametrically opposed to Changeling, and it's Autumn People. Like, in the same way that a Changeling goes around their daily life, hopefully spreading little bits of glamour and wonderment into the world, an Autumn person adds banality in minute amounts wherever they can.
I feel like that game is diametrically opposed to player characters, though. Like, that's the...
Yeah, oh, for sure.
Yeah.
They have quests to create conformity or stamp out wonder.
Yeah, that would not be a fun game.
It would not.
To play.
It would not at all.
Like, I could play brutal monsters and have fun, potentially, but not this. This is just...
But that's exactly the point. It would be no fun.
Yep.
And that's the game. That's why they're so bitter, because they're playing that game. But running a redemption arc for an Autumn person could be interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because unlike unlike Dantean in C20, it's not an inherent state as far as we can
No,
tell.
it's extreme. In fact, there's like rules for it, sort of.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's not easy, and depending on the stigma. And again, I think making up new stigmas, like I like a lot of these stigmas, and I think you can make up new ones too. And it's just not easy for anyone, and especially changelings, to be around them. So,
Yeah.
and nothing about being a grump makes you immune to the stigmas. It just makes you immune to the.
Hmm. The other thing is that trying to redeem one could backfire. Like,
Oh yeah,
we don't have mortal Dauntain anymore, like in the Autumn People book, which maybe that's for the best. But what if you enchant a potential dreamer and they have a horrible experience and their banality goes up and they decide,
hmm
oh, this gift that I have only brings distress and misery, so they retreat
yeah.
into their autumnness.
One
So
thing I've kept musing in terms of like running around in my head and not figuring out how to do it is like separating to some degree being a dreamer, your banality, and being an autumn person.
yeah.
But I can't figure out how to make it like, in theory, you could have a banality 4 autumn person or a banality 8 dreamer, but like what that actually means and mechanics on that, I can't really figure it out.
I think the dichotomy would instead be you can have a low banality non-dreamer
Yeah.
in the same way that you can have a high banality non-autumn
Oh
person.
yeah, and that's fine. Yeah, but I think you could also have a conflicted, like a high banality dreamer should be very hard to muse, but you could maybe not.
Well,
Yeah,
yes, but I think there's the story potential there that I see is we need to get this dreamer's banality down, like breaking a fever.
yeah. Or you find, I don't know, like banality could be more multifaceted, but
Yeah.
it's like in this context, it's actually a low banality. It's just really hard to get that context.
Yeah, it's kind of asymmetric. As a sidebar, this is making me think about like all the people I've known in my life who I feel have lost some of their vital spark, and it's just one of the saddest things to like
Mm,
encounter.
I've
But
had well, I mean, there's also the weird thing now where it's like this happens so much. I mean, the pandemic exaggerated it, but it was happening before then, where it's like so many people I know are falling into this angry, narrow existence.
yeah,
I don't know how else to put it, and about so many different things. Some of them are like, "Oh, I completely disagree with what you're talking about," and others are like, "You're, I sort of see what you're saying, but you're taking it too far." And about every kind of political or social position, and it
yeah.
just like you completely fall into it, and then, like I don't know where that falls into the banality glamour spectrum, but I feel it's still very relevant to changeling, and I
Oh
need to
yeah.
figure.
Well, we live in
Yeah,
an ever more polarizing culture. So
yeah. So if somebody becomes
yeah.
hyper polarized on a very specific thing that's kind of weird, is that high or low banality? I don't know. Is that a dangerous dreamer or a odd high banality person? Or, yeah,
I guess it depends what they do with that perspective.
yeah,
I don't know. But I also mean just like a less extreme version of that. Like, I know people who in university were just bombastic and artistic and were absolutely
yeah,
changeling kind of people. And then, however many years later, it's like you go back and they're like, oh, they're working a finance job and they seem totally like everyone's going to get glamour in different ways. Everyone's going to grow in
yeah.
different ways, and you can't always predict or manage that.
I've
But
come across so many people where they become empty nesters and basically become dreamers, though, my whole life.
well, there you go. There's the contrast.
Yeah, and the hey, you have a stable employment and now things have gotten great, or maybe you don't have a stable employment and now you've gone weirder. Like it, I've seen it all over the place with age,
Yeah,
but I don't think anyone their entire life would have been high banality and now they're a dreamer. But there could be definitely like, well, until you graduated high school and now you've fallen into banality and now you're 60 and you've gone full dreamer. Like that's definitely, I've seen that a lot.
this is one of those things that, with again the decoupling of mortal age from
Yeah,
seeming, people are really into that, and I'm like, cool, me too. However, show me show me the proportion of 40-year-olds who still have as much vitality and optimism for the future and wild dreams that they were pursuing.
oh, I don't know. Have you talked to many people who are around the age of 20 these days? There's not much optimism for the future, I'm finding. Like, it's
Fair point. Um,
weirdly bleak.
That is 100% true. But you get what I mean. Like, there's a sense of time running out that I think only accelerates as you get older.
Yep.
And what you choose to do with that,
Yep.
you know.
I think my mother being involved in things like science fiction conventions at a young age has really skewed my view on, and like knowing her friends and people in her life, and all
Yeah.
that has really skewed. And you're saying like decoupling, and it's almost the wrong word. Like what
Well, all right.
C20 did. It's
Rearranging.
I'm trying. I'm being nitpicky, but like age is still, I feel, very relevant to the theming. It's just not dictating. Like it's not. I never liked the, oh, you turn 13 and now you either fall to bedlam or you become a wilder, and then you turn 25, you either fall to bedlam or become a grump. Like, no, I don't like that.
Although that can still, I do still like that as a possibility. Like,
Yeah,
not
but I
a
think like
given.
everyone is 13 and everyone's 25. I never thought that made any sense, because like
Yeah.
your 25 and my 25 are not necessarily the same.
For the
But
record, by decoupling, I just mean the progression has been
yeah,
separated from each other.
yeah, there
Disentangled.
still is though the idea it presents in C20 that most changelings tend to go from childling to wilder to grump.
Yeah.
But it's not a hard rule, and I don't think we need hard rules on it, because that would just be.
No, but I think we need more mortals that kind of show the range of possibilities that changelings face before them.
Mm-hmm.
Not dreamers or autumn people necessarily, just mortals
Yeah,
who are kind of banal or kind of not banal for one reason or another. They don't have to be aggressively humdrum, but they can still be thorns in changelings' sides.
yeah.
They may not be full of creativity and wonder, but they can still be pleasant to be around. Like,
Yep.
that tapestry, mortals don't get the richness they deserve, I think, in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
changeling games.
Which is funny, because when you look at the, like you're looking at like the NPCs described this way of changelings who are like going through these life event things, they're obviously based on like how people in the real world face these kind of
Yeah, of
things, and like,
course.
well,
Yeah.
mortals would of course do the same thing. So
Well, when it comes down to it, all of this, these are all knobs for the twisting, right? And you can
yeah,
run your game however you want. But I stand by my conviction that Changeling can teach us something about ourselves, kind of like when we talked about sci-fi, and help us practice strategies in a safe space
mm-hmm.
to deal with the actual banality of the world away from the table and
Yeah.
the actual generation of glamour in our own and others' lives.
I think that's the most important part of changeling for me. Like,
Yeah.
and why I was so into it when I first found it, and why I'm still into it and doing this podcast with you. Like,
Yeah.
that is the part that's really doing it. How do I, and I've thought about it differently since I was, 17 versus now I'm 43. Like, this has definitely changed my view on it. But
Did you ever read? I forget if I talked about this in our novel inspirations, but have you read Damien by Hermann Hesse?
no.
It's this German romantic book from the World War One era. I had to read it in university, and I was 18 at the time. And the professor was like, "Read this, digest it, and then go back and reread it every 5 years, and you'll be reading a completely different book." And she was
Mm,
absolutely right. I've reread it like 4 or 5 times now, and each time I read it differently because it's so much about this life arc stuff. And yeah, I don't know. It's worth a read, I think. But it's mortal doesn't have to mean boring,
mhm,
and Fey doesn't have to mean good. Glamour doesn't have to mean good. And I like when games explore the uncertainty around those because in our own lives, those are fundamentally very uncertain things that we have to each hash out for ourselves.
mhm,
So, yeah, it's something that I want more attention to.
mhm.
But anyway, just enchant everybody in the meantime.
Yep.
Someone left a comment that
Yep,
was.
I say that. The Wayfaring Stranger said, I do like the games where mortals are actually important. The Troll Defended Community Center, the Bog and Organizing Community Gardens, changing the interaction with the mortal community. High Adventure is one thing, but the game is inspiring dreamers. I think it's important to remember that. I agree.
100%.
You don't even have to totally separate the high adventures. It can all, I think it works great when they're
Yeah.
together.
When one feeds into the other, then
Yep.
that's Kinain and Galilean life for
Hmm.
sure.
So yeah.
Where can mortals find more about where you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to do that too. Anyway, you can send us an email, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. You can join our Discord, discord.me/CTP. We have a Patreon, Changeling the Podcast. If you're able to help out there, it would really help keep things going. That's another banality, keeping away the banality of fees and things. We have a Facebook page, Changeling the Podcast. We're on Mastodon, changelingpod at dice.camp. We have a YouTube channel, which is a great way if you want to listen to us there too. Changeling the Podcast. We're also on other ways of getting podcasts, but that's one that's good there. And we have our website, of course, changelingthepodcast.com.
Links to all of the above can be found in the show notes to this episode.
And once again, I'm Josh.
I'm that being who is sometimes known in some circles as Puka.
And remember, you can actually do the path of self-inspiration on yourself because it's from your mortal half, and you're mortal, I assume.
Lord, what fools these mortals be.
With respect to their fey selves, all the little peccadillos of mortal life that might impact changelings, both sensible and irritating, remain to some extent mysteries. Should a troll wear sunscreen lest their bluish cast burns purple? Ought a redcap to get some roughage into their diet to balance out all those toxic metals? How often does it take a boggin to do their taxes, and does a slewwood need to even bother with mouthwash? Granted, these are the aspects of mortal life that are somehow even less interesting than hashing out the particulars of dreamers, Kinain, etc., but they are the kinds of idle questions that keep us awake at 3 a.m. on some idle Tuesday. The world may never know the answer, or at least not this week, because we've got other stuff to plan for, plans which are facilitated by the support of you, the listeners. Some dreamers we'd particularly like to thank for their help are our patrons, who get special shoutouts each episode like so. Anarchist, Derek, Dorcadus, Elleris, Eopol, Jason Vines, Oreo, Raskaboos, Sanchiger, Sija, Terry Robinson, Tricerabeth, and Victor Torre. If you'd like to join the ranks of these fine and fancy people, please consider signing up for our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast so we can keep the lights on and the microphones running. We also appreciate reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, as well as word of mouth if you'd like to tell some hapless fleshbags about our show. Whatever you can do, we appreciate and wish you well, be you mortal or otherwise, but at least we hope you're the kind to whom we can say, keep on dreaming.